Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we're going to do a very, very simple fall barn scene. There is nothing to this. This is really easy. I decided to go simple because this has just been a hectic week for me and I just needed to relax and just play with some color. So if we haven't met, I'm Viv. Welcome to Art with Viv. And I hope that you enjoy it here, and I hope that you give this a try because anybody can do it. It is super, super simple. Now, the first thing I did was I just sketched out sort of a barn shape, some tree shapes, a tree line, and then a horizon line. I wet the background where the sky is going to be with just clean water. I'm using 2 different shades of blue, and I'm just dropping that into the wet background where I've wet it with that clean water. I'm leaving a little bit of the sky without any blue paint so that it kind of looks like blue clouds or whatever you want it to look like. It is your painting. I'm going a little darker blue toward the top of the sky and lighter as I go down toward the ground. Then I'm wetting this little area of trees. It was meant to be with clean water, but my brush was dirty, so it was orange water. But then I went back and did the concentrated orange paint, dropped it right down in there while it was wet, and it spreads. The sky is also wet, so those are blending together. The tree line and the sky line are blending together. Just go ahead and drop any colors you want. You don't have to follow my lead. You can just drop greens, golds, oranges, yellows, purple if you want. I even put a nice deep burgundy here. In just a second you'll see that. Right now I'm working on some greens, but just whatever fall colors that you enjoy, go ahead, drop those in there while it's wet and let those colors mix and mingle together. Now is my deep burgundy. I just mentioned it, and I am dropping that in there and letting it blend up into the other colors. Doing the same thing behind the barn. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of blue-green. Excuse me, I got yellow on my brain. Blue-green, did a little light swash of it, and now I'm just taking more concentrated paint. That just means there's less water in it when I say more concentrated paint. Just less water, more paint, and I'm dropping that into some areas because you want to have some light and dark areas. You like to have that contrast. It's pleasing to the eye. Now I'm just wetting that horizon line with just a little bit of clean water, mixing up a nice yellow ochre. Some people call it ochre. I don't care what you call it, as long as you just get it on your paper. And I'm just going along that horizon line. Now, if you are on Instagram, don't forget to follow me at Art with Viv. And then once I get that in there, I'm coming back in with just a little bit of raw sienna. That's just that darker brownish color in there. And I'm using my brush to keep spreading it. I'm working pretty fast. I don't want it to dry. I don't want to have a hard line. And as you see, I'm coming down, blending with clean water. And then I'm coming back with more concentrated color in areas where I want it to look more like there's like a patch of brush or something, or some corn they didn't cut down, or I don't know what kind of field this is. Might be a hay field, but some of it didn't get cut all the way down, so there's little patches here and there. But I'm also dropping in a darker brown near the bottom of those little patches to indicate shadow, because of course the closer you get to the ground, the more those leaves shade that, so it's going to be darker close to the ground. Then I'm just taking clean water and a little bit of yellow ochre and blending that all the way down to the bottom of the page here, the paper. And you see I left some light areas with some dark areas. That gives it a nice visual interest. Now I'm just coming in with a darker color, like a dark brown, a dark umber, and dropping that in there. Then you want to let this dry or make it dry. Use a blow dryer if you have to. Now, once it's dry, where you've mixed up a nice, beautiful, juicy red, and I am going to paint in the barn with this red because, of course, we want this to be as cliche as we possibly can make it today. This is just like a total cliche painting, a red barn with fall trees. But I don't care. This is great, great, great practice for wet and wet technique and for wet on dry. And right now I'm doing a little dry brush. I just have a tiny amount of paint on my brush. The paper is dry, and I'm just sort of scraping that paint across that dry paper, and you see it leaves the white, some of the white of the paper shining through. So we're getting several different techniques here I'm trying to show you. Even though this painting is easy, I was trying to paint like all around the little windowsill here, and then I got frustrated and said to heck with it. I'm just going to paint it in red, just paint the whole thing in red, and I'll worry about the windows and the door later. Because sometimes when you're painting this small, it gets to be very frustrating. So this background is dry, the trees are dry, so I'm just dropping in some of that same color right on top. But of course, since I'm doing wet on dry, the paper is dry. It looks a little darker, the paint's a little more concentrated, and it stays where you put it. If that paper was wet, that paint would spread out like it did in the first layers, but in some areas I don't want it to spread out. In the areas that I do, I wet it first and then drop that color in there. And as you see, it is starting to give that a little bit of dimension, a little bit of texture. Again, this is not meant to be like the Mona Lisa. We're not even going there. We're doing a little cliche painting to practice our brush strokes and practice our techniques. And this is a tiny piece of paper. It's just a scrap piece of paper. Don't throw your scrap pieces of paper away, people. Keep those scrap pieces because you can do these little tiny paintings on them, and it helps with your hand-eye coordination. It helps with learning your techniques, and it's not so scary as a big, huge piece of paper. It is a small little thing you can get done in less than an hour, sometimes quicker than that. If you use a blow dryer, you could probably get this thing done in less than 30 minutes. So, that's why I like to save my scraps and use them to practice my brush strokes, practice my techniques. Now here I have wet this, and I have put in a little darker brown right there because I want you to separate your eye, to be able to separate the hill that is closest to us from that background there. I want to push this hill closer to us, so I put a little darker color behind it. I'm going to wet this hill a little bit, especially this little brush pile we got going here, and I'm just going to drop some darker brown in it, and taking the tip of my brush and just making like brush strokes to look like grass, just straight up and down. I switched brushes and got my smaller, more pointed round brush because I wanted thinner. I really wanted it to look more grass-like, and the other one's tip is not quite as pointed as the tip on this brush. So I just switched over so I could get some more grass-like texture there. Thinner little lines, and I'm just adding them here and there, just right onto the dry paper right there in front, right here on this little side where this little hay didn't get mowed down, or the corn is, I don't know what it is. I'm telling you, I don't know. It's just whatever is right there. Corn, hay, it's your painting. You can let it be whatever you want it to be. I don't care. Just as long as you enjoy yourself, practice a little, get a little painting in, it's good for your soul. Now let that dry or make it dry. Either way, you can let it dry or you can dry it yourself. It's up to you. Once that's dry, we are going to work a little bit more on this barn. I'm very unhappy with it. It looks like a hot mess, but that's the thing to remember when you're painting. It goes through an ugly stage, just like when we were teenagers and you get the bumps on your face and your hair looks all greasy and ratty all the time, and you can't, just everything is wrong and you just feel like you don't look good, and then you blossom into the most beautiful swan ever. That's how your painting is. It goes through its ugly stage. Stick with it. Don't panic. Don't get your panties in a wad. Just work through it. Work through it. It's gonna be okay. So I've darkened up that shadow that's under the roof part, and I am doing just like texture lines with that tiny brush with a little bit of darker red right onto the dry paper, and it's just making more lines and making it look even uglier. But I promise it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Just keep making your ugly little lines on your dry paper and just trust the process. So these ugly little lines are going to be melded down melded. I don't know if that's the right word, but we're just going to take some a wet wash and cover them, and that will smooth them out some. But before we do that, I have dipped into my sepia or sepia. I don't care what you call that either. It's dark brown. And I'm just doing a few branches here in some of my trees, a few trunks, and that just gives it a little bit more texture as well. Now, I do not like the way that those two eyeballs are looking at me, so I am going to paint those in with red paint. They are supposed to be windows, but it looked like eyeballs to me. I did not like it, so I just took some red paint and just painted them in because I don't care. It's my painting. Now I have gotten a little bit of red, and I've mixed it with a little bit of like magenta, a deeper sort of red color. And I'm just coming in there and darkening up that shadow right under the eave of the roof and right here where the roof goes down to the wall. Just adding a little bit of shadow, a little bit of darkness there. Now I'm taking a clean brush with clean water, and I told you I would smooth out some of that texture. So all I did, now this was dry, all except for the shadow part. And I just took my brush and smoothed over with clean water, and that caused those layers that were dry to sort of meld together. It reactivated them and helped them meld together. So we have some texture now, but it looks a lot smoother. It looks a lot less hectic. I also darkened up that shadow right under the eave of the roof. While that's drying off, I'm coming down here. I'm wetting some more parts of these hills, this field here, and putting in a little bit more of that yellow ochre. And I'm taking my brush and pulling it out. I put it directly on the dry paper. So I'm taking my brush and pulling that pigment, pulling that paint down and up so that it looks like grass. So I'm giving it that little fringe look. I'm just coming in with a little bit darker brown. I'm adding in some darker shadows, shoot, I can't talk. My tongue got wrapped around my eye teeth and I can't even see what I'm saying, people. Just put you some darker brown in there while it's still wet and do it in little paint strokes. That's all I'm trying to say. Good gracious. Oh my gosh. Sometimes I just can't get it out. It's in my brain. It just is not translating to my mouth. I'm also going to wet up here near the barn and put a little, just make this a little bit deeper color. And that's just, again, the yellow ochre. I'm also doing a little bit more there in that tree line. But you can do it however you want it. Now I am going to add a little bit of gray, and I'm just I'm just painting a few strokes on the barn roof, adding a little bit of shadow around that barn roof, and just giving a little bit more definition. And that wakes it up some. That makes it look a little bit better. Now we're going to let that dry, or make it dry. Now I've got out my trusty P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. You can use just plain white gouache, which really that's all that is, but you can use white gouache or you can use a white gel pen for this. There are no rules. The idea is just to make your art the way you want to on this channel. We don't get our little panties in a wad if we decided we're going to switch up and use some gel pens. But since I had everything out here, I'm just using my little number 2 pointed round and some Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White to put in the white windows and the white doors. They are trimmed with white wood, so I'm just getting those in there. Remember how I was trying to sort of paint around them at the beginning and then got frustrated and said to heck with it. So now once it's dry, I'm coming back. I'm just going to paint those areas in with, instead of trying to paint around it and leave the white of the paper, I'm just going to paint it in with some white gouache. Again, you can use gouache, you can use P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, you can use a white gel pen. It's your art, it's up to you. We are just here practicing and having fun and enjoying our day. I'm telling you, painting is good for your soul. So don't get your panties all up in a wad about having to do it this way or that way or what the books say or what this person says. Just make your art the way you want to. Trust the process and enjoy yourself and try different things. That's how most art is discovered, most techniques are discovered. People are just trying different things to see how they work out. And I encourage you 100% to do the same thing. So I've got this grid in. This grid on this barn is kind of wonky, but it's okay. It's so small, I forget when you paint this small how hard it is to get it to go right, to get, everything there. Now I just took a tiny bit of blue on the tip of my brush, and that upper half of that white lattice work, I'm covering it with that light blue so that it looks like it's in shadow. I'm leaving the bottom part as the pure white. And now I've taken some of that white gouache and mixed it with the yellow ochre, and I'm just doing some tiny brush strokes. What that does is it draws your eye. That's my southern accent coming out big time. It draws your eye to that barn by putting those little really light flecks of yellow in front of it. And then I'm just doing a little bit across the hills, and that just breaks up that straight line. I don't like that just straight line. I want it to look like we are looking through some foliage, some grass at it. So I'm just doing tiny little brush strokes across that really dark brown. I'm also adding a few little highlights into the trees with this really pale yellow, and that gives the trees a little bit of extra mention. I just started going crazy with the gouache. I decided it was my painting, and that's just how it goes. So there you go. You have got a sweet little barn painting with a beautiful red barn, beautiful fall foliage, just about as cliche as you can get, but it's okay. So if you know anyone that would enjoy this, please like it, share it, hit subscribe, and I'll see you soon.